You built the safety net. The emergency fund is full. The debt is controlled. There is no crisis anymore. So why do you still feel like something bad is about to happen? Not a dramatic fear, not panic, just that low, persistent hum, the one that says, don't relax, don't get comfortable, not yet. You've been saying not yet for a long time. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that feeling never quite left and why the very structure you built to be free may be the thing that's keeping you in place.
Let's be completely honest about what you built and why you built it. At some point, maybe early, maybe later, maybe in response to something specific you watched happen, you decided that financial insecurity was something you were going to solve. Not manage vaguely the way some people do. Solve with intention, with structure, with a level of preparation that meant you would not be caught off guard the way you'd seen other people caught off guard. And so you built, methodically and patiently. You built an emergency fund. Then you funded it past the standard recommendation because 3 to 6 months started to feel thin once you thought carefully enough about what could actually happen. You built a budget and stuck to it with a consistency that required real discipline, especially in the early years when the income wasn't yet where you wanted it to be. You kept your fixed expenses low. You paid off the debt that most of your peers are still carrying. You made conservative decisions when the people around you were making optimistic ones, and in more than a few cases, you watched those optimistic decisions go wrong. You were right, and you knew you were right in those moments. You had thought it through, and they hadn't. The vigilance was earned. Every layer of that safety net was built from real work, real sacrifice, real delayed gratification. None of it was excessive from a certain point of view. The world is genuinely uncertain. Emergencies do happen. People who don't prepare do suffer real consequences. You understood that earlier and more clearly than most people around you, and you acted on it. That part of the story is true. I want to hold that clearly, because what comes next is not an argument against building security. It's something more specific than that. It's an examination of what happens when the architecture you built for a particular threat, for a particular version of danger, from a particular period of your life, doesn't get updated once the threat has passed, or once the threat, if you're honest about it, was never entirely about money in the first place. Here is the thing about vigilance that makes it so difficult to examine. It has never once been wrong to have more cushion than less. There has never been a financial crisis caused by an emergency fund that was too fully funded. There has never been a genuine catastrophe that resulted from spending too conservatively. The logic of vigilance is airtight because the argument for having less security is always weaker than the argument for having more. Which means the internal case for maintaining the safety net never loses a debate. Every time the question comes up, am I holding too much in reserve? Is the caution starting to cost me something? Should I be deploying this capital differently? The answers arrive quickly and easily. What if something happens? What if the income shifts? What if the market does what it did before? The answers are not paranoid. They reference real possibilities, and so the net stays exactly where it is. But there is a difference, a meaningful one, between a safety net and a holding pattern. A safety net catches a fall. It has a specific function in a specific circumstance. A holding pattern is different. A holding pattern is a loop that repeats indefinitely, not because the danger hasn't passed, but because the nervous system that was trained to maintain vigilance never received the signal that it's safe to do otherwise. This is what chronic financial vigilance actually looks like in practice. Not someone being reckless and covering it with a thin layer of caution. Someone who built genuine, well-reasoned security and then kept building it, not because the original threat grew, but because the act of building it had become the primary way they experienced control over their lives.
The safety net stopped being a response to the environment a long time ago. It became part of the environment itself. And living inside a safety net is a very different thing than having one available. When the net becomes the default operating position, when every financial decision gets evaluated first through the lens of, does this protect me, rather than, does this move me towards something, the structure that was built for freedom begins to function like confinement. Not dramatically, not visibly, just gradually, quietly, over the course of years, until the range of movement available to you has narrowed in ways you may not have consciously authorized.
The mechanism here is worth understanding precisely because it doesn't behave the way most financial problems behave. Most financial problems are visible. There's a number that's too high, or a habit that's clearly corrosive, or a pattern that generates obvious friction. You can point to it, you can trace it, you can work backward from the damage to the cause. This one is invisible, because the behavior that creates it is, and always has been, genuinely prudent. The loop begins with threat perception, not dramatic, acute threat, the kind of low-level, ambient threat that a nervous system trained in financial vigilance learns to maintain as a baseline, a background hum of not quite safe yet, that persists regardless of the current account balances, regardless of the income stability, regardless of how many years have passed without a real financial emergency. That background hum produces a specific thought pattern, which sounds like this. This is fine, but I shouldn't get comfortable. I have what I need right now, but this could change. The right move is to stay prepared, stay conservative, stay vigilant, because the moment I stop is usually the moment something happens. That thought pattern produces the behavior. Don't move the capital. Don't increase the exposure. Don't pursue the opportunity that involves real risk, even well-reasoned risk. Stay where it's defensible. And then something important happens at the end of the loop. The behavior produces what feels like relief, a brief, quiet settling, the emotional signal that the threat has been managed, not eliminated because it never fully eliminates, but managed for another cycle. And that relief is genuinely pleasant compared to the low-level anxiety that precedes it. So the brain learns reliably and efficiently that the way to regulate the anxiety is to reinforce the safety structure, which means the anxiety and the safety structure maintain each other in a stable loop. The anxiety justifies the structure temporarily soothes the anxiety returns because no amount of structure ever fully resolves a threat that isn't coming from the outside world in the first place, and the structure gets reinforced again. What this produces financially is a kind of permanent provisional status. The money is there, the income is stable, the emergency fund has been fully funded for longer than any plausible emergency would require, but the decisions that would actually deploy capital towards building something, towards real investment, towards income growth, towards financial structures that involve genuine forward exposure, those decisions keep getting evaluated and deferred, not rejected, deferred, because they don't pass the safety test. And the safety test, because it's being administered by a threat perception system with a calibrated threshold that hasn't been updated in years, rarely passes anything with real upside attached to it. The result is a financial life that is, by any external measure, responsible, and that is, by any internal measure, profoundly static. This is the territory smart money sabotage is specifically built to explore. Not the failures of irresponsible people, but the quiet, self-reinforcing patterns of people who have been doing everything right and still find themselves unable to move forward in the ways that matter.
This is what the loop actually looks like in the texture of daily and weekly life, not in dramatic decisions, but in the small, ordinary moments where the cage is most visible if you're looking for it. There's the version that appears during a good financial year. Income is up, the budget has a surplus, Several months go by and the surplus just sits in the checking account, accumulating past the point of any rational liquidity argument. Not because a decision was made to hold it there, but because moving it somewhere would require choosing where, and every option that generates meaningful return generates some level of risk, and the risk doesn't pass the threshold, and so the decision doesn't happen. Meanwhile, the surplus grows into a number that creates a specific feeling, a feeling of security, of buffer, of not being exposed. And that feeling, in the moment, is genuinely soothing, which makes it very difficult to disturb. There's the version that appears when a real financial opportunity comes up, not a speculative one, a legitimate, well-documented one. An employer match that isn't being fully captured, a Roth conversion window that makes clear mathematical sense in a lower income year, a property market in a city the person knows well at a moment when the entry point is reasonable. The person researches it thoroughly, they understand it, and then they find a reason it's not quite the right moment. There's a version that appears in spending. Someone with genuine financial vigilance often lives well below their means, not because they can't afford more, but because spending on comfort or experience or quality of life trips a wire that sounds like, "You shouldn't get used to this. You don't know what's coming. Don't raise the baseline." The wire fires on restaurant meals and home upgrades and flights that cost more but save significant time. It fires on the kind of spending that would make the daily texture of life meaningfully better. And it fires even when the math, looked at with full honesty, clearly supports the expenditure, because the wire isn't connected to the threat perception system, which has a different set of inputs entirely. And then there's the version that runs in the background of longer-term planning. Someone is building towards something, an earlier exit from the workforce, a transition to work they care more about but pays less, time freed up for the things that actually matter to them. They know, in broad strokes, what they're working toward, but the target number, the amount at which they'll feel genuinely safe enough to move, keeps shifting. It was one number 3 years ago, and they surpassed it. It's a larger number now, and if they're honest, they already know that when they reach this new number, there will be a new number after it, because the safety number isn't a financial calculation, it's a negotiation with a nervous system that was never given a clear signal about what enough looks like.
The financial cost of chronic vigilance is real, and it shows up in a specific form. It shows up as opportunity cost, which is the cost that never appears in any statement and never triggers any alert and never announces itself the way a debt or a loss does. The anxiety didn't disappear, it just became organized. The cost of capital held in place while inflation runs quietly against it, the cost of years spent at a contribution level that felt responsible rather than a contribution level that felt exposed. The cost of a decade of compound growth that didn't happen because the investment kept getting evaluated but never quite initiated. These numbers are not small. They're among the largest financial costs a person can accumulate, precisely because they accumulate in silence, in the absence of action, rather than because of it. But the financial cost may not be the most important one. The larger cost is what it does to time. The vigilant person is chronically living slightly in the future. The present moment is always being evaluated against a projected threat. Spending now creates a future vulnerability. Relaxing now raises the future baseline. Enjoying now is a kind of debt against future security. And so the present, the actual lived present, the years between now and retirement, the ordinary week, the evening, the vacation, gets experienced through a filter of future preparation. Not entirely, not so completely that nothing is enjoyed, but partially, consistently, and cumulatively. The safety net exists. The anxiety didn't get the memo. There's a relational cost as well that doesn't often get named directly. Financial vigilance frequently operates asymmetrically within families and relationships.
One person holds the caution, maintains the discipline, stays focused on the contingency planning, while the other person, or the children, or the texture of shared life, pushes toward the experience, the trip, the risk, the thing that would be genuinely meaningful but doesn't pass the safety filter. Over time, this asymmetry creates a kind of gravitational dynamic. The vigilant person becomes the weight that keeps the family from floating into irresponsibility, but also, over time, the force that keeps it from flying. That role rarely gets named, but it has a shape that the people inside it feel. And there's the cost to self-knowledge. The person who has organized their financial behavior around protection has, over years, become very good at identifying threats. They are excellent at finding the risk in an opportunity, the downside in a proposal, the historical precedent for why caution was correct. What they may have lost access to gradually is the ability to identify what they actually want. Not what they want to avoid, they know that list in precise detail, but what they want to move toward, what would constitute a genuinely good use of the financial foundation they've spent so long building. Preventing loss and creating meaning are not the same project, and for a long time, the first one has been standing in for the second.
I want to stop here for a moment, because what we've been describing is not a failure of will. It is not financial incompetence dressed up as caution. It is not something that required bad judgment or weak character at any point in the story. The vigilance came from somewhere real. It was learned in a specific environment, in response to specific things that happened or were witnessed or feared with genuine basis. The building of the safety net was appropriate. The sacrifice it required was real. The decision to take money seriously, earlier and more carefully than most people around you, that was correct. The only question, and it's worth sitting with slowly, is whether the threat the net was built to catch still has the same shape it had when you started building. Because nervous systems don't update automatically. They update when someone sits down and asks them to, and most people never quite find the time to do that. What follows are observations. Sit with any that register. Your emergency fund exceeds any realistic emergency scenario you can construct. You know this. You have not changed the amount. The number feels like a floor, not a buffer. There is a financial decision you've been ready to make for over 6 months, not because it's complicated, but because initiating it would require moving money from where it currently sits. Where it currently sits feels like safety. Moving it feels like exposure. The decision remains pending. When you imagine spending a meaningful amount of money on something that would genuinely improve your life, an experience, a tool, a period of rest, the first feeling is not pleasure. It is a faint version of alarm, even when the math clearly supports it. The number at which you'd feel financially free to make a significant change, a career shift, a different way of working, an investment in something you care about, has moved at least once since you first named it, and you already know somewhere that it will move again. You can describe in detail what you're protecting against. You find it harder, without prompting, to describe with the same detail what you're building toward. People close to you have at some point used words like cautious or careful in a tone that wasn't entirely complimentary. You heard the tone. You did not engage with what it was pointing at. The feeling of financial safety, when you check the balances and see the numbers where you want them, is one of the more reliable good feelings in your daily life, and you have, without quite articulating it to yourself, arranged things so that feeling remains accessible. Because the alternative feeling, the one that lives just underneath, is something you would rather not sit with for long.
What awareness makes possible here is not a new financial strategy. It's something more foundational than that. It's the ability to see the difference between a financial decision made from clarity and a financial decision made from the need to reduce anxiety. They can look identical from the outside, same behavior, same number, same outcome on the spreadsheet, but their internal origins are completely different. And over time, because they originate from different places, they produce completely different lives. A decision made from clarity knows what it's doing and why. It can sit with the risk because it has looked at the risk clearly and decided it's worth taking. It can move the money because it is asked where the money should go to produce something meaningful, not just where it should stay to feel secure. It can encounter genuine uncertainty without treating that uncertainty as confirmation that caution was always the right response. A decision made from anxiety reduction is always chasing a feeling. The target number is not really a number. It's the feeling of safety that number is supposed to produce. And that feeling, because it originates in a nervous system rather than in a bank account, does not respond to account balances in any stable way. More doesn't resolve it, it just resets the threshold and starts again. The question that becomes available once you can see the loop clearly is not, am I being too cautious? That question will always be answered in favor of caution, because caution never loses its own internal debate. The more precise question is, what specific threat am I currently protecting against? Name it, give it a real shape, make it concrete. And then ask, does that threat still have that shape in your actual present circumstances, with your current income, current savings, current stability? What specifically are you protecting yourself from, and is the level of protection you're maintaining proportionate to the realistic probability and severity of that outcome? Most people who have been genuinely vigilant for a long time already know the answer to that question before they finish asking it. The safety net was built for a version of the world or a version of their own life that no longer quite exists. That's not a criticism, it's just true, and it's visible once you're willing to look at it directly. What a safety net is for, what it was always for, is to make freedom possible, to catch the fall so you're free to take the step, not to become the floor you stand on indefinitely, avoiding every step because falling remains theoretically possible. The net is there, it has been there for a long time. The freedom it was meant to create is still available.
You built something real. The discipline it required, the years it took, the choices it cost, that's not nothing. It's the opposite of nothing. The safety net exists, and it works, and it has been doing what it was designed to do. The only question worth sitting with now is a quiet one. Whether the net has been doing all the work you've asked of it, or whether at some point along the way you also started asking it to carry something it was never designed to carry. Something that doesn't get lighter with more savings, something that a larger emergency fund, no matter how precisely calculated, was never going to resolve. Some people spend their entire lives preparing for a future that already stopped threatening them years ago. That's not a judgment. It's one of the quieter tragedies of financial discipline done without self-examination. You don't have to be one of them, and you almost certainly already know whether you are. That distinction doesn't require a decision today. It doesn't need a new plan or a restructured portfolio. It just requires a few minutes of genuine honesty about what the net was built for and whether the life you're living inside it looks anything like the one you originally had in mind when you started building. That's the question. Take your time with it.